To reap the benefits of generative AI, many IT leaders are turning to Microsoft Copilot. Gen AI tools like Copilot are at the top of IT leaders' project lists, according to Foundry's 2024 CIO Tech Poll. Yet, many organizations are struggling to implement these new technologies due to staff shortages, lack of skill sets, cultural resistance, and more. I am Stan Gibson, contributing editor for CIO Marketing Services, and I'll be your host and moderator for this video webcast. Joining me to explore how to overcome these obstacles to successfully deploy Gen AI are three experts. Vimal Navis, Principal, Data Risk and Privacy at PwC. Welcome, Vimal. It's great to have you here for this webcast.
Happy to be here.
Also with us, Joe Ponder, Managing Director, Data Risk and Privacy at PwC. Welcome, Joe. I'm glad you can be with us today.
Great to be here, Stan. Thanks so much for having me.
And Krishna Kumar Parthasarathi, Corporate Vice President, Microsoft Purview. Welcome, Krishna, and thanks for being with us today.
Great to be here, Stan. Thank you.
Before we dive into our discussion with Vimal, Joe, and Krishna, just a quick word to members of our audience. You're invited to download additional information about our topic today. Just click on the Resources button on your webcast player. Microsoft Copilot uses Gen AI in M365 apps to enhance productivity, improve efficiency, foster creativity, support learning, aid in decision-making, and streamline operations. Joe, some IT leaders might say, however, that Copilot is a nice-to-have feature, but that it's not essential for business. What would you say to them?
What I would say to them is that AI and the adoption of AI is upon us. Many companies have used AI in a number of different facets for a long period of time, especially as it relates to security activities. But what we see with Gen AI and with Copilot in particular is that we are starting to put these really powerful AI tools in the hands of the end user, and doing so in a framework that is safe for them to learn, to explore, and to realize productivity gains. And so the time for AI, like I said, is now. And the companies that aren't adopting, unfortunately, are going to start lagging behind in terms of productivity. We see almost 70% of users in Copilot indicate that they experience enhanced productivity by using the tool set. And so what we also know is that Copilot is built upon the existing 365 framework. And so many of the prompts and the responses that users are getting are sourced not just from large language models, but also from the underlying data estate or data assets that might be housed in SharePoint or in OneDrive, et cetera. And so the benefit is the end user now has these tools. They have a framework, and it's using existing company information that they have access to help make their day more productive. And so again, those that are not already adopting, in the process of adopting and rolling this new Gen AI technology out, are at risk of maybe not being quite as competitive as some of their peer organizations.
Joe, perhaps you could give a few examples of how Copilot provides value.
So there's lots of examples that I could point to, Stan. I think what we continue to see is that each and every day we're faced with and inundated with more and more data, more and more information, whether that be through email channels or folks sharing files with us, or you name it, just trying to get our arms around the vast amount of information that's being thrown our way and to make sense of it is a real challenge. And it can become a time suck for folks without some kind of an intelligent solution or platform to help sift through that. And so those are that's where we start to see some of the advantages of Gen AI solutions such as Copilot, is that I can have Copilot summarize things for me, right? I can have it summarize documents and pull out key points, or summarize emails for me, so that I can grab the pertinent information that I need and move forward with a response, a decision, an action item, right? So that's one example. Another example is, along with the vast amounts of information that we receive, we also store a lot of information, right? And so Copilot can help, given that it sits on top of the Microsoft footprint that we touched on earlier. It really helps us get access to the information that we know we have, we may not know exactly where we stored that important file, right? And so using Microsoft Copilot, asking the right prompts, it can help us mine out important pieces of information that we once had at our fingertips, that maybe we filed it away, and maybe we're not the best at filing things in the right place all the time. And so it can help bring that to the surface to use that information in the prompt reply. And so those are two examples. Content creation is another key example that we see folks utilizing Copilot for. So supporting drafting of net new documents or drafting of net new emails, for instance, and you're able to do that and provide Copilot with existing examples of documents from your existing data footprint or data estate that you have access to. And so I can carefully grab relevant examples from different places and feed them into Copilot and create a net new work product or net new document that more closely mirrors what I'm after. And with the ability to do prompting, it obviously can get more and more precise. And so those are some of the examples. And again, those are really significant in terms of time savings and helping users be more efficient with their time.
And Joe, I was also thinking of adding some examples directly from our own internal rollout of Copilot for M365. PwC is one of the earliest and largest implementations of Copilot for M365. And I've been using it myself. I've been hearing a lot of feedback from teams that have been using it. Some of it is very different from what I would have expected. For example, as part of the projects that we deliver and a lot of internal conversations we have, teams tend to take notes, take action items, key takeaways from meetings. But having Copilot turned on substantially reduces the amount of time. So from spending anywhere from 15 to 30 minutes, I'm hearing teams are spending 5 to 10 minutes just to validate that the action items, key takeaways, and notes that Copilot has taken is accurate. I'm also seeing something similar on the PowerPoint side as well. We do create a lot of proposals. For a lot of our team members now, taking an initial stab at the proposal is being done using Copilot. Again, anywhere from like 15 minutes to even in some cases 2 hours of time that was saved to pull that content together upfront. So I think some of these examples can be extended into the Outlook and the Word realms as well. But hopefully it gives a pretty good idea of how it's already adding value to us as PwC.
Yeah, in a lot of sense, what nicely captured by Vimal and Joe, especially on the productivity part of it, where Outlook, where you can auto-generate a part of it, where response based off of the context of the email. The team's actions in terms of the meetings has been a huge opportunity of improved productivity, which Vimal already called out in terms of the amount of time people have spent, in terms of capturing the action items, capturing the meeting notes, capturing the set of people that needs to be engaged, is all reduced into minutes in terms of the overall productivity gain that you get out of it. So one thing that I would say, which echoes what Joe said, is it is not an option anymore. It is part of the productivity life as being at the workplace.
What data does Copilot use to help with the productivity enhancements it delivers?
Yeah, Stan. So I mentioned earlier about being inundated with information and how Copilot can help with that. One of the ways it does that is by creating a simple knowledge graph, also known as the Microsoft graph. And so using the graph will sit upon the existing data estate that a user has access to. And creates a semantic index of that information so that as I'm issuing prompts to Copilot or requests to Copilot, it's not just the large language model that's feeding back responses. It's leveraging the information that it needs in order to answer the question. So how does it know what information it needs? It uses the knowledge graph. And so that's one of the underlying or underpinnings of Microsoft Copilot that provides significant value, because me as an end user, again, I may not know exactly where things are, where I've stored critical documents, or how documents might interrelate, but the knowledge graph does. And so, users are able to lean upon the knowledge graph, issuing prompts and expecting appropriate returns because the semantic index that's being used on the back end is already building out this crosswalk of relevant documents by document type, if you will.
Yeah, a couple of things I also like about how Copilot can benefit from the data. One is, even though primarily it relies on data within like SharePoint, Teams, OneDrive, Outlook, a user has the ability to give it a very specific file if all the information that they want Copilot to use is already contained in it. I've noticed that doing that actually increases the response and how good the response is directly from Copilot. But the one piece that I'm a big favorite of, I know a lot of companies consider it maybe like step 2 or 3 in their maturity, is the extensibility framework. Copilot for M365 allows companies to extend its data from Microsoft applications to, for example, like ServiceNow or Workday or any business application that a company might have, and in turn prep the user so that they can grab data from those broader enterprise applications as well. There is a lot of configuration options available. When we work with clients, we talk to them about how best to configure graphs so that it does not add any exposure to unexpected data, but there are options available to further extend the reach of Copilot for M365.
Let's continue on. Now, although the Microsoft architecture makes data integration seamless, there is still some work to be done by an organization's IT teams before an enterprise can get the full value from Copilot. Krishna, how should enterprises think about data readiness?
So, Stan, it was a great question. So, as the customers think about adopting into the Copilot, or for that matter of fact, into any Gen AI apps for that matter, the data readiness is a key part of the step that the customer has to think about. When we talk about data readiness, it is at least 2 to 3 dimensions. The first one is how secure my data is when I get exposed into the Gen AI, especially on the Copilot aspect of things. The second aspect of it is around how do I govern the data to make sure that the right set of data is exposed to the Copilot. The third part of it is to how do I have the right transparency to know that what data is exposed to the Copilot. In order to do that, the teams has to make sure that they have a complete understanding of making that data available to the Copilot.
Well, continuing on, who should be involved in preparing data for Copilot?
So largely it is the chief security officers or the CISOs of the organizations normally involved into this. And the other peoples that are is into related to the risk officers and the privacy officers could also be engaged as part of these discussions. So that way the data, the right set of data is made available to the co-pilots.
That's very similar to what I'm seeing with my clients as well, Krishna. In some cases, we actually see legal getting involved as well because they want some level of assurance from within the organization that the data is being used in the most appropriate manner possible. One other thing I wanted to add there is it is not a if this or if that type of conversation, right? We want to do both at the same time. We want to ensure that the company is able to do a pilot and then expand into a more broader enterprise rollout, and in parallel being ready for the data. I would not consider it as a get like 3 or 4 or 5 different things done first upfront, make it a prerequisite, and instead reiterate that it needs to go hand in hand as that pilot and rollout happens in the organization.
I think that the important aspect when we think about getting stakeholders on board with Microsoft Copilot and ensuring that they're engaged, it all starts with education, right? And I know we talk about that a lot with Copilot, but it is important to kind of demystify how Copilot is going to use the data and what data Copilot is going to use, right? So as we think about engaging compliance officers or risk management officers or security officers, we really need to be able to educate that stakeholder on those important questions. What sensitive data are we talking about that might get pulled into Copilot? How is it going to use it? Where is it going to store it? How are we going to ensure the protection of that data remains intact throughout its life cycle? There's answers to all of those questions, but it can seem like a daunting task without the proper guidance and proper education on the front end. And so that's what when I say demystifying, that's what I mean. We have to make sure that these key stakeholders who are very critical to having a successful implementation of Gen AI and Microsoft Copilot have a seat at the table, and that they're able to not only voice their concerns, but understand how Copilot is going to use that data and manage that data and protect that data throughout its life cycle so that it can become an important asset for other people within the company as well, not just the user that initially created the prompt or got the prompt response.
Krishna, tasks like making sure there is appropriate data access and data quality can be time consuming. What should organizations consider here?
So this is where Microsoft Purview and Microsoft Purview for AI is of huge asset into an organization to prepare for the organization's preparedness to the Copilot. When I talk about Microsoft Purview for AI, the first and foremost, which I was originally talking about, where how do I even know how much of my data is readily available to the Copilot? And as Joe was mentioning, what is the governance of the data? What is my exposure of the data to the Copilot? So the first and foremost is to discover that entire data estate in my M365 that gets exposed to the Copilot. Is it right? Is it sensitive enough that is exposed into the Copilot? Is it rightly governed? That insights is what the Purview for AI provides. So the organizations can understand the data. Organizations can understand the security access to the data, and then be able to understand the taxonomy of governance that needs to be enforced towards the data. Once I understand what the data exists in the given organization, then the next phase of it is to identify what is sensitive, what needs to be protected from these kind of exposure into the Copilot, where making sure that right policies are enforced for exposure into the Copilot. This is no different than making sure that organizations protect their data to external exposure. So it's the same model where I have a data that is classified as highly confidential. We wanted to make sure that it has right accessibility to the Copilot. And when I think about it, the data security aspect of it, where I have a right set of prompts that I enter into the Copilot, making sure that it doesn't contain sensitive data. The processing of the prompt has the right access to the data, so no overexposure of data is available. So this means that people classify the content and be able to label the content. So that way we can enforce the policies during the processing not to overshare the data. And finally, when the response comes back out of the Copilot, making sure that the same level of security controls enforced as part of the data. While it may be a little bit longer answer, Stan, and let me finish on the last pillar of it, where the second part, the third part of it, where I am trying to now, where Vimal talked about it, is not the data security officers or the CISOs of risk officers. It is also the legal officers were also interested to see what is being engaged with the Copilot. Many organizations wanted to be able to do the e-discovery on top of the same data where the prompts and the responses happened. The Purview for AI captures the prompts and the response generated as part of that conversation. It treats the entire conversation of Copilot is similar to any other conversation. Store them based off of the configuration of a given customers. And if needed on the legal aspect of it, where people can do e-discovery search or apply the data lifecycle management on top of it. So now that you have looked at where I have security aspect of it, where I am able to know what the data exposure is. The second one is applying the controls that is needed to protect the data. And then finally, for the legal aspect of it, if I needed, I'm able to access the data on it. The last part of it, which is every interactions that we do, we make sure that we capture the activity information, which means that if Krishna has interacted with a Copilot, we capture Krishna has interacted with Copilot at this time from this IP, and these are the prompts and the responses that has happened. We can analyze a risk associated based off of that and see if the Krishna is being risky behaviors. For example, people don't want to create the risky prompts that exposes the data to. So the purview for AI is a rights product where it enforces on all four pillars of support, which is knowing what needs to be done, knowing what is data that exists in the entire organization, how to protect the data, how to govern the data, and also exposing to the legal aspects of making the Copilot prompts and the response available. And finally, collecting the activity data to analyze the risk exposure to it. So this is what it provides to make sure that your organization is readiness of the data is rightly done and make it more efficient for an organization to not to do these things in a manual way. And finally, there are a lot of regulatory aspects of AI and Copilot that needed to be enforced as well. The purview for AI provides from a regulatory standards how prepared you are. For example, European Union has an AI standards. So it also provides that how compliant you are for that standard as well. So you can clearly see the full gamut of coverage of how purview for AI applies into the Copilot.
I'm wondering though, does everything have to happen in steps? For example, do teams need to first address data access before they can move on to data quality?
It doesn't need to be at steps. The major part of it is to know the data. Everything else can happen in parallel. The risk aspect of the analysis can happen in parallel, while the security aspect of analysis of the data can happen in parallel, and enforcing the security protection policies associated to that. So while understanding the data estate for a given customer and what it means to the exposure to the Copilot is the first step. Every other steps can happen in parallel, and it doesn't need to be in a sequential fashion. The last part of it, which I wanted to talk about, is the taxonomy definition, whether the data is confidential or highly confidential or not, which we call it as in purview as labels. That has happened way before even purview for AI or Copilot. Many customers who use purview today, they already had that taxonomy, and that taxonomy already well integrated within the purview for AI. If a particular document is already classified in the label and labeled properly on the document, then the Copilot understands it and make sure that it applies the right set of controls and policies associated based off of the labels on the document. So it doesn't need to be sequential. You need to know what the data is. Beyond that, everything can happen in parallel.
And Krishna, what you said about the knowing your data really resonates with pretty much all the clients we work with. Because what I'm also seeing is, depending on the licensing they have, they could literally run a report that gives information about all the SharePoint sites that are open to everyone in the company, right? And that really helps because now their immediate attention shifts towards addressing those. And step two, again, it doesn't have to happen parallelly, but other thing that I'm also seeing is running reports that shows where sensitive data is in SharePoint sites, OneDrive, and using it as an opportunity to apply labels if they have not already, which is respected by Copilot as well. So when we do some of our readiness assessments, these are key things we call out, which is to start leveraging existing features within Purview that can really make it easier and expedite the rollout of Copilot for M365.
Yeah. And very well said, Vimal. The readiness assessment part of it is the super critical part. This is the know your data. One thing that I want to add on it, which is Vimal, you kind of touched on that, is people might have a controls that says that I shared it to an external organization or have an open access. One of the interesting part of knowing the data and having the information available is to get the reports and insights into which are the data that is rightly access controls versus have a overexposure of the data. While it is beyond the Copilot, but Copilot makes it even more important to get this data readiness part of the controls rightly put in place. So these know your data that Vimal talked about gives you that enough assessment insights to know that what are the kind of data that has been exposed into the Copilot.
I'd like to shift gears, if I might, and talk about skills. Now, many organizations are struggling to deploy new technologies, and we hear from IT leaders that due to skill shortages, they're leaning more on their vendors and service providers to help fill in these gaps. Joe, let's start with some practicalities. Are there best practices for leading data to Microsoft Purview?
Yeah, so the nature of Microsoft Purview and how it can help in this situation is that Purview can help customers gain a better understanding of their overall data estate. As we think about sensitive information existing within the environment, in most cases, that sensitive information needs to be present because it supports a business process or a business function that the company provides. And so, inherently, by having sensitive information stored on a file share or a SharePoint site or in a OneDrive may not be a bad thing, right? What's important is that one, the right people have access to it, and two, that it's protected in a way that is consistent with company policy. And so Microsoft Purview can help companies start to demystify that data estate a little bit so that you know where your most sensitive data assets are stored and you can protect them accordingly. And not just the information that may have existed within your environment pre-Copilot, right? We also help organizations protect data that Copilot is creating as well. Inherently, the data that Copilot uses, as long as it's tagged appropriately, the labeling structure will be inherited in net new documents that Copilot is creating. And so, in the case of sensitive information, if it's labeled in a sensitive nature, the output from Copilot will inherit that same label. And so, again, it really helps provide one, an understanding of the data state, and two, a mapping of what controls we might need to apply to different information assets and different file types, and then three, ensure that we actually are applying those controls where we need to better protect the overall data asset for the company.
Fual and Krishna, perhaps you could chime in. How do Microsoft and PwC work together to help customers?
So PwC and Microsoft, we have a pretty strong alliance, as we call it, and we interact with the global black belts within Microsoft, the sales teams within Microsoft, and we also have a open communication with Krishna's product teams as well. We have regular contact with them to talk about what are the new features that's coming up in Microsoft, sharing a lot of the collateral, as I may call it, that Microsoft has created that can really help clients get started on this journey. Where I think PwC makes a difference is to make it specific or unique to the client. So uh, providing that perspective of for the business teams that are within a company's organization, giving them the right prompts to use on a day-to-day basis that would really help them make the most out of Copilot. We also help them deploy Purview solutions. Both Joe and I, even before Copilot came up, that was one of our priority areas, right? Like be it thinking about the labeling strategy, applying labels, using Purview for audit, Purview for communication compliance, and also the broader Purview suite, which really ties well with Copilot rollout. So in summary, I would say on the PwC side, we provide two different types of offerings. One is more focused on readiness, which goes hand in hand with what Microsoft also offers. And the second is what I would call advanced, which takes it to the next level where remediation or addressing the access related concerns, or even in cases pulling together the AI policy or updates to policies and standards that are all needed in order to have a successful Copilot deployment. The last piece I would say is going a little bit back to the training and awareness that we kind of referenced to at the start of the conversation is how best to use Copilot for M365 for Outlook, for Teams, PowerPoint, and so on. So we also help with the change management aspects by enabling users to use and maximize the potential of Copilot as well. So I would say those are all different areas that we work together with Microsoft on. Joe, anything else you want to add to that? I know you also have a perspective on this.
I think the one thing that is consistent as we engage clients, I mentioned some of the fears and the anxieties of the unknown. But it's cliche, but you really cannot boil the ocean with the task that lies ahead for companies to get their arms around sensitive data. You have to start with those areas of the business and those assets that are deemed most sensitive in nature, and make sure that you have the appropriate classification and controls in place there first, right? And then slowly grow that. Governance of information is an ongoing process. It's never something that companies look at and say, I'm done with that, I've checked that box, right? Because of the flood of information that I mentioned earlier, how folks are continually inundated with net new information and assets. It's an ongoing process to make sure that we are appropriately categorizing data and then appropriately protecting it. And so, a lot of what I'm speaking to, you can do out of the box with a Microsoft Purview type solution, at least for the 80 to 90% of the use cases that companies need to address when it comes to sensitive data. And so, that's the most important piece, right, is making sure that we're starting at that critical asset layer and not trying to come from like a bottoms up approach where we're trying to classify everything. That would be my advice.
We're reaching the end of our time, but before we close, I'd like to ask each of our speakers if they'd care to offer a takeaway for members of our audience today. Vimal, perhaps you'd like to go first.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually called out something earlier during our session, which is to embrace the adoption of Copilot, but at the same time not worry about or make certain steps a prerequisite. What we have seen consistently with other clients is they are working on both the productivity pieces of Copilot and the governance of data in parallel versus going with one first versus the other. So in my mind, that's a big takeaway that I would like to share with the audience here.
Joe, key takeaway?
I think the one takeaway that I would tell folks who are listening today is, I mentioned start simple earlier. Keep the when you think of the data classification scheme that you're using, start with those most sensitive assets, but also keep the use cases simple, right? Educate users on the basic functionality that can be realized and the efficiencies that can be realized by utilizing a solution like Microsoft Copilot. Ensure that the policies are there as well for them to be able to be innovative, but yet do so in a way that doesn't violate any policies that you might have, and ensures that the data that's being generated and utilized is done so in an ethical manner. But start simple, keep it simple, put some guardrails around it, and give users a taste of what it can do for them, and then slowly build up those use cases over time.
I just want to echo what both Vimal and Joe has pointed out. One is embrace the Copilot. This is going to help you with the productivity. This is there to be supportive, to be able to embrace and grow. And the other part of it is rather than having the anxiety of what the readiness of the overall thing, there are tools, there are process, and take it into the crawl, walk, run of identify the data, classify the data, label the data, define the taxonomy of the system that needs to be put in place. And this is where the tools like Purview, the solutions like Purview, and the support like PwC is going to be a huge part of the work. And to be able to take that journey forward and also put the right controls, as Joe said, like in terms of protecting the data. It is like, while we say that, oh, it is like a step-by-step of making it happen, there are tools that helps you. There are taxonomies that are standards that helps you, and embrace those things to be able to make that happen. And in terms of one thing that I really wanted to emphasize, while AI makes the readiness of the data critical, it is beyond just the AI. And this is the readiness is going to help to protect the data for any organizations. And Copilot is just one aspect of it. So in a larger sense, the data readiness is a critical aspect of any digital transformation in the world today. And Copilot helps us to get there. I would rather embrace it more and make the data readiness for a completeness of the organization in addition to the Copilot.
That's great information and great advice. That is all the time we have in this video webinar. Sincere thanks to our three experts, Vimal Navis of PwC, Joe Ponder of PwC, and Krishna Kumar Parthasarathi of Microsoft. Thanks to all for explaining how to reap the benefits of Gen AI with Microsoft Copilot and Purview. As I mentioned earlier, you're invited to download additional information on this topic. Just click on the resources button on your webcast player. And thanks for joining us. For PwC, Microsoft, and CIO, I'm Stan Gibson.